The chain lay half buried in the sand, mottled with rust yet glinting faintly under the late sun. An empty swing creaked nearby, each breeze carrying the metallic chime across the playground. A child, long gone, had heard it last. He swore it rattled by itself. Now the links shifted again, dragging sand into a small mound. The air sharpened, like breath straining beneath the soil. The chain lurched once, tugging back as though something below had answered. She crouched beside him. "What have you found?" she asked lightly. Theo only lifted his scraped hand. A faint red line crossed his palm, already puckering. Mrs. Adler frowned, brushing sand aside with the edge of her shoe. There it was, a rusty chain, links thick as her finger, woven down into the earth. "Old playground scrap," she murmured. But her voice carried less conviction than she'd intended. She extended her hand, meaning only to tug it aside so no one else scraped themselves. The moment her fingers brushed the metal, she stilled. It was warm. Not the ordinary warmth of sun-touched iron, but deeper, like heat rising from within. She pressed her palm against it more firmly, testing. The warmth was steady, rhythmic. A pressure pushed faintly back against her skin, too deliberate for chance. It felt like a heart. Mrs. Adler pulled her hand back quickly, a shiver crawling her spine. She glanced at Theo, who was staring at her with wide, searching eyes. "You felt it too," he whispered. Mrs. Adler didn't answer. Her gaze dropped again to the chain, half buried, glinting faintly in the morning light. Children laughed behind her, oblivious. The chalk sun still shone brightly on the pavement. The jump rope still slapped in steady rhythm. And in the middle of all that joy, one impossible truth coiled beneath the sand. The chain pulsed. Chains don't throb like veins, but this one did. Theo stood rooted in the sandbox, his scraped palm pressed tight against his chest. Mrs. Adler wanted to wave it all away, to tell him it was nothing more than buried metal, a leftover from some forgotten playground repair. Yet she couldn't ignore what she had felt: warmth, rhythm, the push of something living beneath her skin. Theo's whisper spread faster than she could silence it. "It moved," he told the girl beside him. She backed away instantly, shaking her head so hard her braids whipped her cheeks. "No," she muttered, eyes wide. "No, I'm not going in there again." Another child froze mid-skip, rope dangling at her side. Her lips trembled. She looked at the chain as though it had grown fangs. And then, quite suddenly, she burst into tears. The ripple carried outward, eyes turned, small gasps stirred, the circle around the sandbox widening like a tide pulling back from shore. Mrs. Adler raised her hand, voice firm. "That's enough." But the words came too late. The whispers had already started, slower, heavier, like smoke curling from a fire no one could see. "It wants out," one boy muttered, clutching his backpack straps. Theo crouched again, brushing sand aside with quick, nervous motions. The links beneath glimmered, faint and sharp. He leaned closer. "See," he said. "It's breathing." Mrs. Adler's patience snapped. "Theo. Step back." Her own hand trembled as she stooped. She forced herself to look directly at the thing, refusing to let her fear grow legs. Sand slipped through her fingers as she scraped at the surface. More of the chain appeared, each link almost too clean for the decay that cloaked the edges. And there, cut into the iron, were markings. Letters. Numbers. Too precise, too deliberate. Not the casual scrawl of playground vandalism, but engravings made to last. Mrs. Adler's heart slammed against her ribs. She tilted the links, brushing them with her thumb. Yes, clear as print. She froze. The children waited, restless, their eyes flicking between her and the half-buried metal. "What does it say?" Theo asked. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her lips trembled. A long pause stretched, taut and brittle. She wanted to lie, to invent something harmless, to preserve the fragile bubble of laughter and chalk suns. But the numbers burned into her eyes, undeniable. Finally, in a voice softer than she intended, she whispered, "Coordinates." The word sank into the air like a stone through still water. The girl with the braids flinched. Someone asked, "Coordinates for where?" Mrs. Adler didn't answer. She traced the numbers again, her stomach tightening as the realization sharpened. She recognized them. The pause lengthened, children holding their breaths, eyes waiting. She tried again, her voice faltering before the truth slipped free. "They mark, here." A wave of murmurs rolled through the circle. Fear, disbelief, excitement. "This school?" Theo asked, his voice cracking. "Yes." The word stuck like a thorn. Behind them, the custodian had wandered over, drawn by the hush. He squinted down at the markings, then shook his head, muttering under his breath, "Told my brother this ground was wrong. My granddad used to say, this land was chained for a reason." The children's faces turned toward him, startled. Theo's eyes were wide, his scraped hand forgotten. "Chained to what?" he asked. The custodian didn't answer. His gaze lingered on the sandbox a moment longer, shadowed and grim, before he walked away without another word. Mrs. Adler rose slowly, brushing sand from her palms. Every laugh, every squeak of sneakers, every snap of a jump rope felt thin now, distant, as though a curtain had dropped over the ordinary. Beneath their feet, the ground was not playground soil. It was something else, something marked, claimed, bound. And for the first time, Mrs. Adler wondered if the children had been right to whisper that it wanted out. The coordinates pointed to their own school. Curiosity clawed harder than fear. When the last bell rang and the children scattered home with backpacks bouncing, Mrs. Adler stayed behind. The air felt different without their voices, emptier, brittle. She locked the classroom door, crossed the yard, and carried with her a pair of work gloves, a notebook, and the same ruler she used for grading math papers. The sandbox sat quiet, the chalk sun on the pavement already smudged by wind. The chain was still there, a faint glimmer beneath grains of sand that seemed almost to hide it on purpose. She crouched, slid on her gloves, and tapped the exposed link with her ruler. Clang! The sound was wrong, too resonant, too deep for such a small piece of metal. It rang like iron struck inside a cavern, as though the ground itself had been hollow all along. Mrs. Adler stiffened, then tapped it again. The same unnatural echo rolled outward. She braced herself, gripped the chain with both hands, and pulled. It didn't simply resist. The links quivered under her palms, trembling with a faint vibration that hummed through the gloves into her bones. The sound was low at first, then rose, like a muffled voice humming from deep inside the earth. She let go instantly, chest tight, ears ringing as though she'd almost heard words. "God," she muttered, shaking her hands. "You still at it?" The voice startled her. She looked up. The custodian, Mr. Kelly, leaned on his broom at the edge of the playground. His gray cap shaded his eyes, but she could tell he'd been watching. "Just checking for hazards," she said, trying to sound casual. "Hazards, huh?" He scratched his cheek with one gloved hand. "Cemented gear, more like. Old anchors from when they rebuilt the yard. Harmless." His chuckle was forced, the kind that tried too hard. And yet his gaze lingered on the chain too long, the corners of his mouth too tight. "If it's harmless," Mrs. Adler asked carefully, "why does it feel like it's moving?" Kelly's broom bristles scraped against the ground once, twice. "Best not to fuss with what's under there," he muttered. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Mrs. Adler sat back, breath tight in her chest. She scribbled notes into her pad, unnatural resonance. Vibration through gloves. Possible hollow structure beneath. The words looked clinical on the page, yet her pulse betrayed her. The yard darkened as dusk crept in. Shadows stretched across the chalk drawings until the sun disappeared behind the rooftops. Still she stayed, driven by an ache to understand what she had touched. At last, she took the chain in her hands again. She tugged harder. The links quivered like plucked strings, and the vibration pressed against her skin with more urgency, like something below pulling back. The sand around it loosened, sliding toward a hairline crack that widened by the second. Mrs. Adler gasped, scooting back on her heels. The crack spread outward with a dry hiss, a jagged seam opening in the sandbox floor. Tiny pebbles rattled as they dropped into the darkness below. She leaned closer. From the gap rose not just stale air, but a draft so foul it clawed her throat, the stench of decay, sharp and wet, tangled with something older, heavier. And beneath it, faint but undeniable, came a sound. A dragging scrape. Like metal pulled slowly across stone, far beneath her feet. Her pen slipped from her fingers. The yard around her seemed to shrink until only the sandbox remained, its edges splitting wider, the chain trembling in silent defiance. That night, long after she left, Mrs. Adler dreamed of that sound again, chains dragging through school hallways, unseen, unending, the footsteps of something that had never stopped moving. Would you keep testing, or walk away? A draft rose from the gap, stinking of decay. By the second day, whispers drowned out laughter. Children clustered in uneasy groups, their games faltering. The sandbox no longer looked like a place to dig and build, but like a mouth they feared might open. Every scrape of shovel or clink of chain seemed to hush the playground. The adults weren't immune either. By mid-morning, Mrs. Adler overheard two teachers near the staff room window, their voices low. Construction debris, one insisted. They left anchors when the jungle gym was replaced. That's all. The other shook her head. No. If it were just debris, it wouldn't be marked. Those engravings were deliberate. Mrs. Adler walked past, carrying her papers, but their words gnawed at her. She had seen the coordinates herself, too sharp, too intentional. She knew this was no accident of construction. At dismissal, the fear slipped further into the open. Parents waited at the gates, scanning their children with anxious eyes. One mother gripped her daughter's arm so tightly the girl winced. "Don't you dare touch it," the woman hissed. Her voice carried, sharp as glass. "It's hungry." Several parents turned at her words. The silence that followed was thick, charged. Mrs. Adler felt her stomach twist. Hungry. It was exactly the wrong word, and yet it clung to her like truth. That evening she jotted it down in her notebook, the pen hesitating. Parent said, hungry. Even as she wrote it, she hated the way it looked on the page. The children's stories grew darker, embroidered with each retelling. One boy swore he'd seen the chain twitch even when no one touched it. Another claimed he'd heard whispering under the sand, voices begging. "It's chained to a monster," Theo whispered to his friends, his face pale but eager. "That's why it pulls back." "No, it's cursed," argued another. "The chain is the curse. If you break it, it'll come out." Their imaginations fed each other, each theory louder than the last. The sandbox became a stage for rumor, and fear was the only audience. Mrs. Adler tried to keep order, reminding them it was just metal, but her words sounded hollow in her own ears. She saw the way even the boldest children avoided stepping too close now, how their games bent wide around the sandbox. The chalk drawings had stopped altogether. The pavement lay blank, as if no one dared leave marks near the chain. By the week's end, she could bear the uncertainty no longer. She stayed late again, armed this time with a spade. The playground was empty, silent except for the faint rustle of leaves. She knelt in the sand and dug around the links, careful, deliberate. Grain after grain slipped away until more of the chain gleamed unnaturally beneath the soil, shiny, polished, almost new in defiance of its rusted crown above. Her spade bit deeper. The vibration returned, faint and insistent, but she pressed on. Then, thunk. The blade struck something solid, something that wasn't stone. The sound was hollow, reverberating through the ground. She froze, her breath shallow. Carefully, she cleared more sand. Wood. A flat surface, buried deep. Her pulse raced. She brushed it with her glove. It was aged, brittle, but intact. A structure, buried where no playground should have hidden anything. Her breath caught, sharp and ragged. This wasn't just chain. This wasn't just metal. Something larger lay below, waiting. For the first time, Mrs. Adler wished she had never touched it at all. A buried structure lurked beneath the sand. Beneath the sand, history pressed against the present. Mrs. Adler dug slowly, carefully, peeling away layers of grit as though unwrapping something that wanted to stay buried. The wood she had uncovered the night before was not a lid, not yet, it was a cover hiding something heavier. She cleared around it, breath shallow, heart pounding. Her spade scraped metal. The sound jolted her spine. Different from the hollow wood thud, this was sharper, deeper, as though she had struck bone beneath flesh. She crouched lower, brushing sand away with her gloved hands. The more she cleared, the clearer it became, not just loose links, not scattered debris, but an iron plate. It was thick, heavy, and bound to the chain as if the links themselves were its veins. She pulled away another fistful of sand. Symbols emerged. At first they looked like scratches, random gouges etched across the plate. But as more was uncovered, the lines sharpened into form, a crest. She leaned closer. The grooves were deep, carved with force and precision, sinking into the iron until they seemed to bleed shadow. She brushed them with the side of her glove, and hissed. The edges sliced through the fabric, not enough to cut skin but enough to remind her these grooves were no decoration. They were meant to last, to warn, or to wound. She stared at the crest. A shield divided by lines, a pair of wings etched on either side, and at its center a circle broken into halves. The image tugged at memory, something she had seen in old town records, maybe in a dusty book of local history. She didn't need to see it polished to know what it was. The founding seal. This town's council, its very origin, had left this mark. Buried it deliberately. Bound it in iron. The grooves flaked as she traced them. Bits of residue came away, dried, brittle, but sharp. She brought her hand closer, the smell hitting her first. Not just rust. Something sourer, metallic, almost sweet. The taste of iron filled her mouth as though she'd bitten her tongue. She spat and wiped her lips, gagging slightly. It clung to her, bitter and unmistakable. Her chest tightened. Why here? Why beneath a schoolyard? A gust of wind rattled the swings above her. She froze, realizing the sound wasn't only from the air. Her ear caught something faint, too faint, almost imagined. She pressed closer to the iron plate. And then she felt it. The hollow below exhaled. A sigh, long and low, rising through cracks she hadn't known were there. It wasn't the whisper of shifting soil or settling beams. It was wet, labored, almost human. She stumbled back, her heel catching the edge of the sandbox. The sound followed her, escaping from under the iron like breath from lungs that had waited too long to breathe. The chain quivered once, faint but undeniable. Mrs. Adler steadied herself, chest heaving, notebook trembling in her hand. She scribbled through shaking fingers, iron plate. Bound crest. Residue, iron taste. Chamber below, breath. The words were nonsense, fragments that would mean nothing to anyone else, but she wrote them anyway. To stop herself from forgetting. To stop herself from denying. Above, the playground was silent, emptied for the night. But she swore she could still hear echoes of children's voices, twisted now, faint and distorted, seeping through the cracks. She forced herself to stand, staring at the crest one last time. The founding seal, here in the dirt. A chain tethered to it, binding something below. And the unmistakable truth, it wasn't done breathing. What would you do if you found this? The hollow beneath the plate sighed, like someone breathing in the dark. The sigh from the earth would not let her sleep. Mrs. Adler lay awake through the night, her notebook open beside her, the words, iron plate, breath below, scrawled across the page. No matter how many times she turned off the lamp, she swore she could still hear that faint exhale, steady as a phantom lung pressing through the walls. At dawn, exhausted but compelled, she packed a lantern, rope, and spade into her car and returned to the playground. The yard was deserted, bathed in the gray hush before sunrise. The swing sets shivered gently in the breeze. Chalk stains from the children's drawings looked ghost-like under the dim light, faint suns and flowers already half erased by wind. She crossed to the sandbox. The chain still lay in its shallow trench, waiting. The iron plate beneath it gleamed faintly where she had exposed it. In daylight it seemed impossibly out of place, like a coffin lid in a place meant for games. Mrs. Adler hesitated, her spade poised above the soil. She could stop here. Fill the sand back in, pretend she had never touched it. Pretend the breath had been her imagination, the warmth just sunlight. She stood there trembling, the rope coiled in her bag like a question. Then she whispered to herself, if not me, who? She pressed the spade into the earth. The hours crawled by. She dug carefully around the plate, loosening the soil that clung to its edges. Her arms ached, sweat dripping beneath her collar despite the cool air. The plate resisted, refusing to budge, as if the earth itself held it tight. At one point she stopped, panting, and nearly dropped the spade. Enough. Leave it. The words hissed inside her head. But she gritted her teeth and pushed harder. At last, with a groan like teeth grinding, the plate shifted. The chain rattled faintly, loosening around its anchor. A seam cracked open, sand spilling into the darkness below. Then the smell struck her. Not just rot. Not just damp stone. But the sharp sweetness of burned hair, acrid and cloying, clinging to her throat. It smelled alive, as though something had died gasping only moments ago, though she knew it had been buried for years. She gagged, pressing a hand over her nose. The odor seeped into her skin, her clothes, her hair. Even when she pulled back, it clung to her, sticky and vile. The plate slid another inch. Beneath it, a wooden trapdoor came into view, blackened around the edges where the chain coiled tight across its handle. Mrs. Adler crouched lower, lantern trembling in her hand. The wood was old but intact, splintered from pressure, its grain dark with moisture. She ran her glove across the surface, and the chain rattled faintly, vibrating like a warning. Her throat tightened. She thought again of the children's whispers, "It wants out." "Why bury this beneath children's feet?" she murmured. The words were not really a question, but they hung in the air, trembling. She looped the rope around her wrist, bracing herself. The lantern flame quivered as if in reply. Then, with trembling hands, she gripped the chain around the handle and pulled. The trapdoor groaned, wood bending against the links that bound it. The stench of burned hair surged stronger, filling her mouth, her lungs. She gagged but kept pulling, sweat dripping into her eyes. The crack widened. Darkness yawned beneath. She leaned forward, trying to glimpse what lay below. Thud. She froze. The sound hadn't come from her spade, or the shifting earth, or the plate. It came from below. A single, solid strike against the underside of the trapdoor. Her breath caught, her body stiff. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. Then, another thud. Softer this time, but deliberate. Like a fist testing a door. Mrs. Adler stumbled back, lantern shaking, spade clattering against the iron plate. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Something beneath had answered. The door thudded from below, once. The ground had been a vault all along. Mrs. Adler knelt trembling over the trapdoor, lantern shaking in her grip. The thuds had gone quiet again, swallowed by the soil. But silence was worse, it meant waiting. She braced herself, tugged once more on the chain, and the rotten wood yielded with a splintering crack. The opening gaped wide, spilling darkness thick as oil. A damp draught curled upward, licking her face with the scent of mildew, rust, and that same awful sweetness of burned hair. She lowered the lantern inside. Light fell on stone. Steps descended sharply, swallowed by black. Walls glistened wet, the mortar between stones darkened with age. Adler's breath caught as the flame illuminated shapes along the sides. Chains. Not loose links like the sandbox tether, but shackles bolted into the walls. Some hung open, rusted thin. Others still locked tight, small circles clearly meant for wrists far smaller than hers. Her hand shook harder. The lantern beam traced lower. Deep gouges scored the stone, claw marks, fingernails dragged until they split. Scratched initials overlapped in frantic lines. JT, LW, SH, dozens of them, etched by hands desperate to leave a mark in a place that had none. Mrs. Adler's throat closed. She forced herself down the steps, each creak of her boots echoing into silence that pressed too thickly. The air grew colder with every step. The lantern swayed, shadows clawing against the walls. At the chamber's center stood a chest. It was squat, heavy, bound not with a lock but strangled in chain, thicker than the links above, darker, coiled so tight it seemed to choke the wood itself. Adler hesitated, then reached for her spade. With a grunt, she jammed the blade beneath the lid, pried, twisted. The chain groaned, links grinding. Finally, with a snap, one coil gave way. She forced the chest open. Inside lay papers, piles of them, brittle and yellowed. Journals. Her fingers hovered before she dared to lift one. The leather binding cracked like old skin. She opened it carefully. The writing slanted in desperate strokes. She read by lantern light. We are chained until obedience comes. The little ones cry but no one answers. The masters say punishment breeds purity. Some never leave. Their cries echo long after silence. Adler's vision blurred. She closed the journal, pressed it against her chest as her knees weakened. She reached for another. The ink was darker, fresher somehow, as though it had been buried later. Its words shivered across the page. The chains rattle at night. They move though no one touches them. They say the iron holds back what should not rise. We were told never to lift it. Never. Or it will return. Her skin prickled. She lifted the last book from the pile. Its cover bore a faint initial scrawled in the corner, A. She froze. Her breath hitched. She flipped open the first page. The handwriting was familiar, not in its form, but in its echo. The surname written at the bottom of the entries was her own. Adler. Her stomach dropped. The lantern nearly slipped from her hand. Her family. Her great-grandfather? Or his father before him? The name tied her bloodline to this place, to these chains, to this cruelty. Her heart thudded loud in her ears as she read the final line, ink-blotted, uneven as though written in haste. The chain must never be lifted. The letters dragged across the page like a desperate claw. Mrs. Adler dropped the journal back into the chest, stumbling backward, her lantern jerking wildly against the walls. The chains hanging along the chamber rattled faintly, stirred by her movement, or by something else. Her breath came fast, shallow. Whatever lay beneath the sandbox wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a prison. And the last warning, etched in the hand of her own blood, screamed louder than anything she had ever read. The last line warned, the chain must never be lifted. Secrets rarely stay buried once unearthed. By the following week, whispers had thickened into storms. The children told their parents what they'd seen, the chain, the sighing earth, the markings. Parents told neighbors, neighbors told reporters. By the time Mrs. Adler arrived at school Monday morning, news vans already idled at the curb, cameras pointed like weapons at the playground gates. That evening, the PTA convened in the cafeteria. The long tables rattled with restless hands, paper coffee cups clutched too tightly, voices rising and breaking. Mrs. Adler sat near the front, her notebook hidden in her bag, her heart clamped in her throat. A father slammed his fist against the table. The sound silenced the room. "My son won't step foot in this school again," he said, eyes burning. "Not while that thing lies under your playground. Dig it out. Burn it. Bury it somewhere else." Murmurs of agreement rippled across the room. Several parents nodded fiercely, gripping their children's shoulders as though to shield them even here. Across from them, a woman in a tweed jacket, the town historian, rose to her feet. Her voice was measured but sharp. "You can't erase it twice. What lies beneath is part of our town's story, however dark. You destroy it now, and you destroy the truth with it." Her words were met with jeers. "Truth?" a man spat. "You want our kids to play over a grave?" "It isn't a grave," the historian countered. "It's a record. Proof. And proof matters." The argument broke into clamor. Parents shouted over historians, teachers tried to restore calm, but the cafeteria walls only echoed anger. Through it all, Mrs. Adler sat motionless, her pulse hammering. Because she knew what none of them did. Her family's name was written in those journals. The hand that warned never lift the chain might have been her great-grandfather's. Or his father's. She felt their blood in her veins like poison, tying her to the chamber below. When the room quieted, someone asked her directly, "You were the one who found it, Mrs. Adler. What do you say we do?" Every eye turned toward her. She swallowed hard. "It isn't safe," she began. But the word caught. She couldn't finish. She didn't know whether she meant safe for the children or safe for the town if it stayed buried. The silence pressed, heavy. Finally, the principal stood and dismissed the meeting, promising further discussion. Parents stormed out, their voices still raised. Historians lingered, whispering furiously among themselves. Mrs. Adler left last. The night air outside was sharp, filled with moths fluttering against the lamplight. She paused by the playground. The sandbox loomed darker than ever, the chain still half buried but visible, gleaming faintly like a watchful eye. She thought she saw it twitch. The excavation began the next morning. Workers in hard hats and gloves swarmed the sandbox, clearing sand, soil, and debris. Reporters gathered behind the fences, children pressed against their parents' legs to watch. The plate was lifted. The journals were catalogued. Historians confirmed the reform school's existence, its cruelty, and its erasure from official records. The town buzzed with outrage and shame. But then the digging went deeper. Mrs. Adler stood at the edge as shovels struck something else, another chain, thicker than the first, its links the size of fists. At first it seemed inert, another anchor lost to time. But when the men cleared more dirt away, the chain trembled. Not from their touch. Not from their tools. On its own. The workers froze. One dropped his spade. Reporters surged forward, cameras clicking furiously. Parents gasped, clutching their children close. The chain stirred again, a slow, deliberate shift, as though something beneath flexed against its bindings. Mrs. Adler's breath hitched. In the crowd, a child whispered the same words she had heard days before, echoing Theo's warning. It wants out. The playground, once filled with laughter, held only silence now. Would you reveal this to the world, or keep it secret? The chain jerked hard enough to split the dirt. What we bury always claws its way back. The playground was fenced off within days. Yellow tape fluttered like warning flags, circling the sandbox that no child dared approach anymore. Workers moved in with heavy equipment, unearthing iron, wood, and stone. Each day revealed more of the hidden chamber, and with it, more fragments of a story the town had long tried to erase. By week's end, officials declared the site a protected excavation. Classes were rerouted indoors. Reporters swarmed, historians lectured, and parents argued, but the laughter of recess was gone. The schoolyard felt hollow without it, a stage stripped of its players. Mrs. Adler stood at the edge of the cordon, notebook clutched tight against her chest. She watched as the chains were lifted link by link, their bulk groaning against the winches. Some were coiled carefully into trucks, destined for laboratories and archives. But one, the first chain, the one Theo had uncovered, was set aside. Its rusted surface gleamed under the sun, faintly alive. Later that month, the town unveiled it inside the local museum. The chain lay under glass, coiled in a wide circle like a serpent pretending to sleep. Spotlights glinted off its links, magnifying every scar, every engraved mark. Beside it, a plaque detailed the discovery, remnants of the lost reform school, 19th century. Used for restraint and confinement. Location concealed until 21st century excavation. Children shuffled through with their classes, forced by teachers to file past the display. Some stared in silence. Others refused to come near. One boy pressed his palms flat against the glass before recoiling as though he'd felt heat. Another girl whispered, trembling, "It's still moving." And Mrs. Adler, standing at the back of the group, knew they weren't entirely wrong. She still dreamed of it, the vibration in her gloves, the hum of a voice through the links, the sigh that rose from below. She still tasted iron in her mouth when she woke. Most of all, she still carried the name scrawled in the final journal, binding her blood to this horror. Was her family complicit in cruelty, or had they been guardians, forced to seal away something worse? The question ate at her, neither answer offering peace. She tried to tell her students what mattered. Standing in her classroom, chalk in hand, she said, "History isn't only what we celebrate. It's also what we hide. And hiding pain doesn't heal it, it festers. The truth is heavy, but carrying it is better than pretending it isn't there." Some listened. Others fidgeted, staring out the window toward the fenced playground where the swing swayed gently in the wind, empty and unclaimed. At night, when the town slept, Adler sometimes returned to the museum. She stood alone before the glass case, staring at the chain. The air felt different there, thicker, tense, as if the links still hummed faintly in the quiet. She pressed her hand against the glass once, just once. Heat met her palm. Not sunlight. Not imagination. Heat rising from within, steady as a pulse. She pulled her hand back quickly, glancing over her shoulder. The museum was empty, the halls silent. Yet in that silence, she thought she heard it, just for an instant. A faint rattle. Small, almost polite. A reminder. She walked away quickly, but the sound followed her into the night, coiled tight in her memory, heavier than any lesson plan she could write. The playground remained abandoned, the chalk suns washed away, the jump ropes stilled. The swings creaked in the breeze, moving as though unseen hands pressed them forward and back. And beneath the soil, deeper than excavation had reached, the second chain waited. Thicker, darker. Stronger. Somewhere in the silence, a chain rattled once.